to Seize the Data. Today's guest, Steve Miller, has over 17 years of experience leading data strategy, as well as analytics. At his last role, he was Vice President of Enterprise Data Management at Signet Jewelers. Before that, he was the Director of Data at Optimizely, as well as Mixbook. And in the early days, he was a data scientist at Apple. We're so excited to have him a guest today on Seize the Data.
Welcome back to the Seize the Data podcast. We're so excited to have our guest, Steve Miller, here today. How's it going, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So to give a quick background on Steve, so Steve's worked at some of the largest technology companies in the world, startups as well as Fortune 500s, but I don't want to do the intro on his behalf. So Steve, if you could give us just a quick background on your experience, I think that would be a great starting point for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Logan. I'm one of the lucky ones. For the last 20 years, I've been able to be a data scientist, a data analyst, a data engineer, and run data teams and be able to solve a lot of the mysteries that affect business from a data perspective. Whether that's why is something happening, what can we do to make it better, and how do we test to make sure that these results are holding. And it's been an absolute blast. And I've got to work with large companies like JP Chase, Apple, Optimizely, and Signet Jewelers, which has Kay, Zales, Blue Nile, and Jared.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the experience. And I know in our last conversation, we were chatting about at Signet, you were doing some exciting things with AI and LLMs. And I think with that being one of the hottest topics in the world right now, I'd love to learn more about what you're doing there.
We had a great project at Signet called Vocals, Voice of Customer Automated Language Scoring, where we wanted to use the technology from Amazon's Comprehend and Bedrock and Microsoft ChatGPT. And how do we use AI to listen to customers at scale? How do you listen to 1.5 million surveys coming in after sales from our customers and actually be able to make heads or tails of what the customers are saying? So when a customer goes into the store and says, "My diamond ring was beautiful, but customer service from Steve wasn't very good," what is the customer trying to say there? Diamond ring was beautiful. Diamond ring product quality, positive sentiment. Customer service from Steve was not that good. Customer service, negative sentiment. And we used the process of taking our first-party data and data from Amazon Comprehend to be able to score what that's saying and build it into a comprehensive analytics table and be able to apply that to executive reporting.
Oh, very interesting. And I'm curious to learn more about, I guess, how that problem came across your desk and then kind of what was that initial approach? Because it sounds like the end result involved a lot of cutting edge technologies, building out kind of this analyzing platform that has LLMs in it from scratch. But what was the initial problem statement? And then how did you approach solving it and ultimately land at this product that you built?
Obviously, with the excitement of ChatGPT and large language modeling and how can we summarize, we got direction from our board and our executive leadership of how can we use this in our current environment and be able to rapidly prototype something to show this technology. And there was a lot of executive support of how can we use AI for something that listening for speaking. And I think that drove a lot of excitement of using the technology to listen to large blocks of text and turn it into actual actionable insights actionable insights.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah, and I'm just trying to think through all the different, I guess, areas in the world where this could be applied, because it seems like, I guess, every business is trying to collect feedback. What is our NPS score? How are we ensuring our customers are happy? So I'm curious if you would apply it to any other areas.
I think you're dead on the money. The engine itself can be used for a lot of concepts. What if it's not just customer? What if it's your employee surveys that can be pulled into that information as well? What if it's the log files you get from your metadata? I mean, how powerful would it be to see the errors in your data pipelines and be able to say, give me a summarization of the 1,000 jobs that ran last night. Which ones failed? Is this the first time they failed? Or is this something that's multiply failed over the last 90 days? So you can use it to listen to not only your customers, your employees, and even the metadata itself.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. And I guess switching gears a little bit from the AI and the work you're doing at Signet, I'm curious to learn more about kind of your approach with working with different stakeholders. Maybe some are difficult, maybe some are great. Because with your wealth of experience from large companies to smaller companies, just how do you approach working with different stakeholders and particularly the difficult ones?
It's always a question that comes up, and anytime I'm talking to junior analysts or jobs itself, is how do you deal with a difficult stakeholder? And I think it really comes down to is stepping back and analyzing, is it the stakeholder that's difficult, or is it the fact that you don't have all the information in the background? I mean, not getting the full answer, maybe they didn't get the full answer from their stakeholder. So is Logan difficult as a stakeholder and give it to me, or does he not have all the information to help give that? And I think that's where you have to be patient and empathetic and listen to your customer and try to understand the whole situation before you make to a snap judgment to what's going on. So sometimes you got to slow down at the requirements process to help you speed up in the development process.
Exactly. Yeah, for us at Datalogz, I guess listening to customers and trying just to really understand the problem that's trying to be solved has been so critical to our business. And I feel like it applies to kind of everywhere in the professional world. Is you need to understand, what is the problem you're trying to solve before you start answering and formulating ideas on how you get there. Is what is the actual business question? And
I think you're right. I don't think anybody's what I laughingly call a Bond villain that's trying to slow things down. It's do you have the aligned goal? Do you have the aligned expectations on resources that we're putting into it? And once you can start checking on the box on the alignments, I think you get to that better answer for the development.
Exactly. Yeah. And since we're, I guess, talking about kind of different data hot topics and working with stakeholders, I'm curious your views on a data mesh setup versus just working with a centralized data team. And I assume you've seen all kinds of different models from the companies you've been at, but do you have a, I guess, style, or if you're building a data team of scratch, of how you would do it, how do you approach this?
That's a great question. Data mesh has really become what I call an in vogue term over the last couple of years. I really had to step back because I've historically generally worked under a centralized data team. So one data group that supports multiple lines of business. And in a company large like Signet, that's 14 different customers and 14 different production systems that this centralized team has to do governance, ETL, data movement, and storage, and reporting. And as I'm starting to look into it, data mesh is starting to make a lot more sense. Because if you think about a centralized data team, what are you asking that data governance team to do? Be an expert on every metric across those 14 lines of business. Be responsible in understanding how the production system's back tables work and turn into that business metric. Basically what's happening is you're asking your centralized data team to be a group of unicorns instead of specialists. Experts at all that become very hard if they ever leave to replace. Whereas with a data mesh concept is if we build a data universe inside that line of business and start putting in data resources that can run that data universe, you're now slicing the needs and the scope of capability that you're asking those data people to work on. And now you're building specialists from unicorns.
Right. Yeah, I really, I guess, find that approach interesting because then there's the business, people at least closer to that business domain that are really solving the problems and challenges that exist in the business. Because if you're removed and you're, I guess, the BI analyst or data scientist that's responsible for serving those 14 different stores or brands across the organization, is how do you really become an expert and have relationships with those business stakeholders that you're delivering a product for? Because I guess everyone hits bandwidth constraints at some point, and having one central team responsible for so many different aspects of a company can be so complicated.
I think you're exactly right. Also, it comes down to resource allocation. If you have one centralized data team, the whole cost for that centralized data team just goes straight to the company. Well, how is finance supposed to know what their asks actually do to the bottom line if they don't own the budget for it? I think that's another advantage of data mesh is you really start putting the cost of data, the cost of governance, basically the overall data cost to each metric. And you really turn the centralized enterprise reporting team into data consumers instead of data producers, which at the end of the day, they really are if you think about the relationships of production systems to reporting platform.
Right. Yeah, and I guess at Datalogz, we're seeing it more and more where just the number of kind of self-service analysts or people who are able to create their own reports, dashboards is just exploding in most companies. And then adding in all kind of the co-pilot and AI type features, it just gets easier and easier as you have the business domain knowledge. You can create those in visualizations and hopefully soon data pipelines as well to actually service what you need. But as you get more of these data users, what we see at our clients is they end up with a lot of sprawl where you have department 1, department 2 reporting out the same KPIs slightly differently, or there's conflicting stats throughout a company, a lot of duplication of the same data sets being brought into production multiple times. So in that kind of data universe model, I'm curious how you fight kind of, I guess, the other challenge of it is, hey, we have a sprawling environment.
That's a great question. And I definitely have seen that across my experience of, well, yes, this is the sales report that comes from operations. This is the sales report that comes from finance. This is the sales report that comes from marketing. And if you're a C-level employee and seeing all three of these reports, you turn to your centralized data team and go, why don't these match? And the true answer is they were built at different times by different groups under different rules and requirements. So how do you solve that sprawl? And what I generally found is in a data mesh format, you really are relying on the semantic layers in each of the organizations. If sales is owned by the finance department, then all sales reports, whether it comes from operations, marketing, or finance, should really be data moved from that semantic layer in finance. That way, it becomes that source of truth for the metrics across the shared enterprise. And I think that's where a smaller centralized data team can kind of put the zebra shirt on and play the referee across these delivered metrics.
Very interesting. Yeah, so creating that semantics layer centrally, and then that distributes out to those different, I guess, data universe or pockets within the business.
And I think that's really the value of the mesh, is that the line of business is building that fabric that goes from like a data lake to a data warehouse to that semantic layer, so they control the definitions that go into that shared semantic table. So you might have sales and you might have a bunch of attributes that you can slice and dice sales by, but it's all controlled by the department that runs the data quality.
Right. And what we see so much now is like there's so many different software solutions out there trying to help you create semantics layer. I think ultimately it's a people problem and getting everyone on the same page. But I'm curious, if you go into a new company, let's say it's a Fortune 1000, not jewelry because that's your background, go back to a new technology company, and you need to create the semantics layer there. And they already have thousands of KPIs, reports that exist. How do you set up that and start changing people's minds throughout an organization?
I think you have to get away from boiling the ocean, which is where a lot of large companies kind of get into problems. If we're going to do something, we have to do it for everything. So all the past is brought over, and the cost of moving all that just is too hard of a price and burden to take on. So you really have to start with the data catalog and turning to the lines of business going, okay, let go of the past for a little bit. Let's talk about the next 6 months. What are the business decisions that we are making over the next 6 months that we want data to have that credibility to make those decisions more effective? And that way you can truly hone down on key metrics and build those initial victories in data governance on metrics that are being used now. And I think it also helps that the cost that you're putting in those data governance for the smaller metrics can be attributed to the projects that are requiring those decisions. Because at the end of the day, data is a cost. You are building credibility and you're building depth in what you're looking at with the data, but that costs money.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if or how you feel on kind of data as a cost center versus a value center, but how have you had to, I guess, on past teams you've been at, justify different spend around data? Because I talk to so many CDOs and it always seems like a challenge of, okay, we're spending too much, it's growing too quickly, we need to manage but how do you kind of measure that or report that back to your senior leadership?
I think there's always been an evolution of requests that have come into my data teams. Kind of what I'd say the lowest maturity is, well, this is super critical. Okay, if I've got 50 things in my backlog that are all super critical, which ones do I do first? And the logical quantitative answer is, okay, what's the return on investment on this project? Well, in my career, I would generally hear, well, we'll save $1 million if we do it. $1 million seemed to be that magical, super critical equation to say this is really important. And I think the maturity really comes down to is that supercritical and $1 million isn't the right answer. But it's really hard for a line of business to quantify what is the value of this credibility to make this decision. So I think I had to kind of flip the game and say, okay, when are we making this decision? Well, if we're not making this decision for the next 6 months and I have another request that a decision is being made in 2 weeks, that really does give a quantifiable justification of what to work on. So when is the decision being made? Who is making the decision? And what is the cost of the tasks and all the infrastructure that goes around this decision? I think if you take what's the cost, which people are very quick to be able to say off the top of their tongue, and the timing, which is very easy to quantify, you're now getting closer to where is this data really going to be effective?
Right. Yeah, and I guess that goes into another point then on how we're kind of measuring KPIs or success for a data team. I think ROI, like it's the easy one to focus on, like you said, but are there other more qualitative success metrics that you would measure data teams by?
I think if the goal is to provide data to decisions, what is the cost? What is the timing it takes for development? As we build a stronger GitHub library and we're able to do an ETL 50% faster, we're lowering the cost to getting that data. So it could turn around to what is the cost per metric that we're putting out, and what is the cost per attribute to be able to slice and dice those metrics. And I think you can really measure an effective data team of how they can lower the costs to make that development happen. You can also look at utilization as well. Are we putting together metrics? This super critical thing that I asked for in May, are we still looking at that report 90 days later? Was the report the right vehicle to solve that answer? Was it more of an ad hoc? So I think utilization and costs are really good ways of looking at your data team.
Right. Yeah, what we see all the time is there's so many assets that are just built that go unused, or maybe it's a quarterly report that's refreshing on a 2-hourly basis. And it's just kind of a wasted cost, like leaving a faucet on within a house. And yeah.
I mean, how many times have we hired an intern or a junior analyst to go through every report to find out when was the last time it was used, who was using it, is it something we can clear out? And that's the only way to really kind of clear out the attic of reports in business, especially the older reports that were just PDFs and emailed, that we have no idea what the real usage of it is.
Right. Yeah, I hear the approach so much of, hey, we're just going to shut it down and see who complains. And we're going to do that in a slow phased approach of, okay, this week we'll shut down these 20 reports. No complaints, we'll go with this 20. And yeah, it's an interesting way to kind of clean up the environment. But going back to the KPI piece is that I really feel that utilization and use should ultimately be one of the kind of the key drivers that we're measuring against. But then there's also, I guess, variables to that is like, okay, if the CEO views this on a daily basis, it's probably pretty important if it's only getting one view a day and it's the CEO. And so there's, I guess, a lot of kind of checks and balances to measure with, and a lot of variables on what is this kind of core KPI.
You're exactly right. And definitely who's using it as a valuable asset to look at it. But if you're not measuring it, you never really know to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, you got to measure to ultimately get to the best result. And then I'm curious to learn just more about kind of your career path in data so far. And so it sounded like you started as a data scientist, and I'm curious to learn more about kind of your favorite projects or data scientists that you've worked on in your career so far.
That's a great question. And I've really fell in love with linear regression for a lot of different reasons in 2 projects that I worked on. One was predictions of sales. One of the things that really got me to fall in love with data was in early in the 2010s, 2011s, a movie called Moneyball came out.
Oh, yeah.
And the concept of how do you look at metrics and what's going to happen to drive decisions. And when I walked out of the movie at the theater, I'm like, why are they just doing this in baseball? Why aren't you using this in retail? Why aren't you using this in sales? How can you look at your whole team as baseball players to put them in a better position? So I really fell in love with linear regression of what is the things that you can control and A/B test to drive sales. I mean, how powerful would it be to have a report that came out in the morning as a CEO, not what is the sales that happened yesterday, but if you don't change what you're doing, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. next week, 30 days from now. And here are the drivers that you can control to help change that future. Now you're not being reactive. You are really getting to that goal that we've all been looking for of being proactive.
Exactly. And on the Moneyball quote, I think I see an Oakland A's behind you in your background, a little dog on your shelf that's from the A's. So maybe that the Moneyball full circle there.
It's hard not to be an A's fan when you're a data person, because it was the first team to really embrace that data concept. So yes, they got a fan of me very quickly.
Right. And so before your career in data, then what were you doing, and how did you transition into data?
I was actually a stockbroker for JP Morgan Chase. And I was in a very interesting position that I was situated into a bank branch that was right next in Columbus, Ohio, right near Chase's operations center. So I got to do the budgeting and the financial planning for a lot of the executives that were at Chase. And one of the executives turned to me and said, the way you analyze the numbers and use a quantitative sales pitch with me is something I've never seen before as a financial advisor. How would it be if you came work for me and started looking at my numbers and advising me like an analyst, just like you were doing this? Would that be something that'd be interesting to you? And finding the mystery in the numbers has always been what's been impressive to me. So not having to do sales calls and be able to just focus on looking at the data was very attractive to me, and I got a big break there.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, so it sounds like the data world almost found you then, and then just the calling you were waiting for.
Yeah. The other big break I got is when I got an interview in Cupertino to go to Apple. And this is one of the stories I actually can tell from the process. And what was neat about it was when I got there, I've been an Apple fanboy since I was a kid. I had an original Macintosh. I had an original iPod when it first came out. So the ability to interview at Cupertino was something that was very attractive to me. And I had 7 interviews scheduled for that day that I was interviewing. And I had a 1-hour break. And while I was at Infinite Loop, I saw that they had an employee store that had the Apple hats, the Apple jackets, the Apple pens. And I was like a kid in a candy store with that hour break. And I was quickly buying as many hats and vests and that sort of thing as I could buy. And I had this big Apple bag sitting there with my last interview. And my last interview was with the head of iPhone operations. And she turned to me and said, okay, what's in the bag? And I had to smile kind of sheepishly going, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to come back here. But as much of a fan as I am, I couldn't leave Cupertino without taking advantage and be able to have an Apple hat and that sort of thing. And she just smiled. And it's really funny because 2 weeks later, they offered me the job as data scientist for iPhone operations. And when I talked to my recruiter a few months later over lunch, I was like, what drove that decision? He said, well, we were kind of on the fence, but that last interview, the head of iPhone operations said, I've never met an applicant that had a bag of Apple stuff they bought during their break, and we've got to get this guy. So the advice I always give to everybody applying for jobs at Apple is show them how much you love being there. And then they're going to know you have the passion, and that's something you can't teach.
Yeah, and I feel like in every role interview, demonstrating that passion for the company and really understanding it is really key. And do you still have the hats and some of the swag you bought there?
I do, actually. On the bookshelf, I have the Apple hat. I also have one of my prized possessions, which is an original iPhone inbox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And were you working, I guess, on the original iPhone then, or did you come in a few generations later?
I came in a few generations later. I mostly worked from between the 6 and the 10. But it was neat to see great changes in factories like better waterproofing, a front-facing camera module, and just better processes. And it's the mysteries. And one of the exciting parts was I actually got to travel to Shenzhen, China, where they have the Foxconn factory and actually see how the data is applied on the lines of the factory itself. And that was just an amazing experience. From a kid from a very small town to watch 150,000 people go from their dorms to the factory, it was just like watching a sea of people, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And it sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I guess, unless you're working at Apple, of course. But to be at the top kind of technology company in the world and seeing like literally how it's made from behind the scenes.
A very cool experience.
And then, Steve, my last question for you is I'm just curious, what advice would you give to CIOs, chief data officers out there who are spinning up a new data team?
It's a great question. Realize what data is for you, because it is an investment. One of my favorite quotes is the value of data is subjective, but the cost of data is very concrete. So what are the true numbers that mean something to you? And invest in those numbers just like you would in people or any other commodity. That way you're putting your chips and your numbers and your money into the things that really drive your day-to-day. I think sometimes we need data. Let's go get a data team, and they kind of leave it from there. These are the people that are going to give you the unvarnished and quantitative numbers and values and reports and dashboards that drive your business. Our goal is to help you make better decisions. So look at it as an investment and help give direction and feedback to make it an investment that's valuable to you.
I like it. Yeah. Driving better decisions is ultimately the goal. Awesome. Well, Steve, thanks so much for hopping on the Datalogz podcast today, Seize the Data. We really appreciate your time and all the insights you shared, and I learned a lot today. So thanks so much.
Logan, I appreciate the conversation, and thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome.